All right, hey, one of our favorites reached out this weekend, shared me his latest college football hourglass projections for the SEC. I said, I got to get him back on the show. Jake Wimberly, ESPN Radio out of the state of Mississippi. Jake, how's it going, brother?
Michael, it's doing good. President's Day, so trying to get some work done on a holiday here. And I appreciate you having me on today.
Yeah, Jake, oh, bad. You're going to get me in trouble already. People think I already hate the Gators because I'm a Tennessee grad. I got nothing against the Gators, even though they beat Tennessee, what is it, like 16 out of 18? But that's neither here nor there because according to your model, this is the number one. We'll get into all these teams, Jake, but the number one team that stood out. I don't know what Billy Napier did to you, Jake. You got the Gators, your model, I should say. Florida going 2-10. 2-10, Jake. I mean, if this happens, I mean, I don't know if Billy Napier sees October.
No, he probably doesn't, right? So let me give a little backstory. And like you and I spoke about off the air is, I'll have all this stuff ready to go and where you can read about it, podcast on it here, coming up in about a month, right at the end of March Madness, where I'm working through all the conferences right now. We start with the Southeastern Conference and then work through, all the Power Four now conferences and the G5 conferences, and then of course I'll have my playoff projections and all that stuff. But I started with the SEC, and now that recruiting is over, at least this cycle, we will have another transfer portal window, so there'll be an opportunity for guys to move around a little bit. But I said, hey, I think we've got enough data to really start turning out what win totals will look like, working through schedules. So we'll start with Florida and just kind of a revisionist history here. The model that I use has several factors in it. One is a talent ratio model that ranks the talent of the team. So as I told you, I have combed this thing back to about 2.5 years of true recruiting numbers. And then you have to go about 2 years of transfer portal numbers, because no longer can we say, hey, Alabama finished number one in recruiting, or Georgia 4 straight years have the number one roster talent in the country. Well, they may, but do they really? If you want a great example of that, look at how competitive Auburn was with Georgia and Alabama last year, and could have won both of those games. And I think a lot of that is because of the depth that Georgia and Alabama do not have any longer. So we use a talent portion of it. Returning quarterback number is part of it. A coaching staff number is part of that. What I call my impact ball catcher metric, which is highlights wide receiver rooms, because I think wide receiver rooms are extremely important in college football. And then there's the offensive and defensive efficiency portion of it. So it brings it all together to create a ranker for each team. And then I look at the games, and then what does the schedules look like? For instance, where Florida has by far the hardest schedule in the Southeastern Conference, Auburn kind of gets a pass. Ole Miss gets kind of a pass. Missouri kind of gets a pass this year. And they still have hard schedules, but nothing like Florida. So when you look at Florida, this year, and coaching wise, Billy Napier has been one of the worst in the Southeastern Conference. Really, you can only say, if you go up to Arkansas and Vanderbilt, is there worse staffs in the conference? And then of course you look quarterback play, pretty nice quarterback play with Graham Mertz. It's kind of middle of the pack. Receivers wise, what we call impact ball catcher metric, that can be kind of middle of the pack. And then you look at Florida offensive and defensive scoring efficiency off last year and project that forward. They were 28th in the country offensively, 86th defensively. So when you compound that with a schedule for Florida that starts out with Miami, and they're going to be an underdog against the Miami Hurricanes, a very good, I think, Miami Hurricanes team. This could be the best Miami Hurricanes team we've seen in probably a decade. They're going to be an underdog in that game. If they get that win, that's going to be big. That's going to catapult them. But without just going through the whole schedule, I've got Florida with 1, 2, what I call one possession games, 3, 4, 5, about 7 possession games, meaning that those are games that could go either way. I've got them with a close loss to Texas A&M. Believe it or not, I have them a close loss on the road to Mississippi State, just because Mississippi State plays Toledo the week before. Florida plays Texas A&M the week before as well. Central Florida, I have Florida winning a close win. Then you go at Tennessee and Kentucky, and then a bye week, Georgia at Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida. I mean, look, Michael, I don't know that Ohio State and Georgia want that schedule. So they're going to be an underdog in most of those games. And if Billy Napier just gets this team, and if you believe it, look, Vegas set their win total at 6, 5.5 to 6. There's a reason for that. They set that number so they can get plays on both sides of the line, so to speak. A lot of people will say over 6 or 5.5 just because, oh, yeah, Florida for sure will. I tend to go under that. I have them at 2 wins. I think it could, equal out around 4 wins, maybe 5. Some of these one possession games, but it's going to be a tough year in Gainesville.
Yeah, but it's kind of pathetic, isn't it, Jake? Because as we've grown up, I mean, and a lot of places say this, Jake, but it's true at Florida. The standard is to compete for championships. Obviously you're not going to win one every year. Heck, Alabama and Georgia don't win one every year, but they at least compete for it. So it's just whether it's 2 wins, whether it's 5 wins, even if we go over the top and give them a bunch of these one possession games and say they win 6 or 7. Is that good enough in year 3 of a coaching tenure at a place like Florida? I would argue it is not. So I don't know. I would bet you, Jake, there's a lot of Florida fans. If you gave them truth serum, they're saying, I hope we go 2-10 so we can get us a new coach in here that knows what the hell he's doing. You know what?
Yeah, no, I agree. And, that's the thing is Florida should not be in this position. I mean, Florida should be, in my estimation, where Alabama has been, not necessarily, maybe nobody's going to make that run for 10 years that Saban had, but competing for playoff spots. They need to be competing against Georgia, competing against Texas, competing against the Oklahomas of the SEC. And for whatever reason, outside of Steve Spurrier and Urban Meyer, Dan Mullen with 1 New Year's Six-Day Bowl, Jim McElwain, I think maybe had a 9-win season. It just hasn't happened there for some reason. And I think there has to start being some self-evaluation of why that is the case at a place like Florida where they should be at the top and they should expect to be there.
Now, this was also interesting to me, Jake. CFB Hourglass, you've got projected right now only one undefeated team. And these are just regular season records that we're throwing out here. This isn't postseason. You only one undefeated SEC team, and it's not the one I think most would assume. It's not Georgia. It is Texas. You've got Texas 12-0, Georgia 11-1. And I'm going to make an assumption, but you let me know. Is that because Georgia has to go to Texas, to Alabama, and to Ole Miss? Or the schedule after last season that was kind of joked all off season. What a pathetic schedule this is. They have done a 180 on the Bulldogs. They got a very, very difficult slate here. Was that kind of the difference of why your models got Georgia 11-1 and Texas 12-0?
Yes, 100%. And, you look at just what you just said, you kind of framed it up. I mean, you look at Georgia's schedule versus Texas's schedule. And look, schedules we know this, they matter. I mean, look at Texas, they open up with Colorado State. And we're talking about a team that is one of the top recruiters in the country. And, when I kind of mulled through this, and let me just go over here and tell you this too. This is the way I have it. Not everybody's going to agree. The top talented teams in the country, are still Alabama and Georgia. And throw in Oregon, Texas, and even the Miami Hurricanes. And Michael, there's not a whole lot of difference between those teams as far as talent. When you start, bringing in the transfer portal rankings, you start bringing in everything that's going on with roster churn and attrition. But back to Texas, one of the best rosters in the country. Steve Sarkisian gets a bump and a bonus today, new contract that's out there. Those details, I'm sure you've seen it, are out there. One of the better quarterbacks in the country in Quinn Ewers. They have the best wide receiver room, where you could argue one of the best in not just the conference, but the country. And a schedule that is very manageable. Colorado State, now they have to go to Michigan in week 2, but you look at Texas. I mean, this is not your same Michigan team. No Jim Harbaugh, no quarterback, no running back, no J.J. McCarthy, no Blake Corum, new coaching staff. So I feel comfortable that they will go in there and get that win. Then they go UTSA, Louisiana Monroe, Mississippi State, and a bye week before they get Oklahoma on the third weekend or second weekend in October. Then they get Georgia at home, Vanderbilt on the road, a bye week, and they finish with Florida, at Arkansas, Kentucky, and at Texas A&M. I do think Georgia probably gets them in the championship game of the Southeastern Conference, which will make that very interesting as far as seeding is concerned for the national playoff. But I think Texas and Georgia are the two best teams in the conference. And I give them nod just because of the schedule, and they play the Dogs in Austin for the Longhorns.
Could you see a scenario? I know I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit here, but again, you said it. You would favor Georgia in an SEC championship game if it was Texas and Georgia. Could you see a scenario where these two they're so good next year that they play 3 times, regular season, SEC championship, and then the third time would obviously be in a college football playoff scenario?
I think it's possible, and that's one of the things I've been talking about on my show. Is I'll be more intrigued to see than anything is how this new playoff committee ranks and puts teams in a bracket. Right? Is Texas and Georgia, and if you want to throw Alabama or Ole Miss, only one team can represent the SEC with an automatic bid. Right? The first round bye. What does the committee do with the second team? So let's just play the scenario out. Let's say Georgia wins the SEC, Texas is number two. Are they on the same side of the bracket as Georgia, or will they be placed on the other side of the bracket as Georgia? A lot of that, of course, is going to be where they're seated in this thing, because I still believe, obviously, Notre Dame, if they get to 10 wins, they're going to get into this tournament. You'll have at least one group of five team in, and I'm not so sure that the committee in year one, if we have a Tulane or a Liberty or a Boise State or a Memphis, if you have two of those teams that have one loss or undefeated, you may get two of those. So where will the committee put the other big SEC school? Will it be on the same side or the opposite side? If they break them up, absolutely, you could see, a championship scenario. Of course, if you put them on the same side, you may see them as well. But it will be fascinating to see how the bracket is set up.
Now, your model's also got Ole Miss at 11-1. That's pretty fascinating. That's what you want to see if you're an Ole Miss fan, with all the NIL, the coaching staff continuity, the leaders from last year, a lot of them coming back to Oxford for another season. So safe to assume you got Ole Miss as a college football playoff team here at 11-1.
Yeah, I haven't chalked through the whole country, but I would fair say if they go 11-1, they're going to be in this playoff. And look, again, I always say, don't apologize for your schedule. But you're talking about Lane Kiffin, who you're bringing back majority of a team that just won 11 ball games this past year. They made Penn State look lethargic and slow in the Peach Bowl. Obviously, they lost Quinshon Judkins to Ohio State, but I feel that they'll be able to replace that production one way or the other. We know about the transfer portal hall, but Michael, they go Furman, Middle Tennessee, at Wake Forest, Georgia Southern, Kentucky, and at South Carolina. They should sleepwalk through that. I mean, if we're being honest. And then they host LSU at home, and they get the Tigers. The Tigers will have a bye week coming into that game. They get them at home before they get a bye. Now, here's where it gets really, dicey for them. They'll go Oklahoma at home, at Arkansas, and host Georgia. They need to go 2-1 in that stretch. I like them with a close win at Oklahoma, a win on the road at Arkansas, a loss to Georgia, and then they finish up with Florida and Mississippi State. But, here's the thing, too. I don't know how many teams can go 10-2, because we don't have divisions anymore. So you could see a scenario where you have a 0-loss Texas or Georgia, a 1-loss Texas or Georgia, a couple 10-2s and some 9-3s in there. And I just don't know how many. We assume the committee is going to give 4 teams, bids to the playoff. But I think it's razor thin when you start talking 10-2. 11-1 gets you in. 10-2, believe it or not, you may be left out.
Well, that naturally goes to my next question. We're going to find out how much Cousin Shane loves you right here, Jake, because you got Tennessee 10-2. Well, is it 10-2? I'm just going to assume that that's good enough. Now, it's not always going to be the case, but I'm going to assume, Jake, that a 10-win SEC team is going to make the college football playoff. So, I don't know, where would you lean on that? If Tennessee goes 10-2, they play Georgia, they play Bama, they play at Oklahoma. A lot of difficult games for Tennessee. If they're winning 10 games, we have to assume Nico's the real deal. One of the best offenses in the country, I would think, with winning 10 games. Would a 10-2 Tennessee, do you think they would deserve to make the college football playoff?
Yeah, I think they would deserve to get in. And, let's just play this out. If I go to my final, if this works out right, you go Texas will be number 1, Georgia 2, Ole Miss 3, Tennessee 4, followed by several 9-win teams, and, LSU, Oklahoma, Auburn, Texas A&M. But I think so. Just looking at Tennessee real quickly, I have their losses at Oklahoma and then against Georgia. I think I like the matchup with Alabama at home. And then the rest of the schedule, they should be favorites against NC State, Kent State, Chattanooga, Arkansas, Florida, Kentucky, Mississippi State, UTEP, and Vanderbilt. So they should be favorites in those games. But again, the problem, and I'll know this once we work through this and just for fun to see what happens is, in the ACC, for instance, if you get a 1-loss Florida State and a 1-loss Miami and then maybe a 1-loss Clemson, that creates problems. How many teams will get bids out of the Big 12? Will it just be the champion, or how many, or will they give it to another one? How many teams out of the Big 10? So to answer your question, I think at 10-2, Tennessee would make a strong case, especially when you start talking strength of schedule numbers and having to play Oklahoma, having to play Georgia. having to play Texas or excuse me, Alabama, that they would have a strong resume for it. But again, I think you're kind of crossing your fingers at 10-2. But I like Tennessee this year a lot.
Now, you said there we got a couple teams at 9-3, but I want to ask specifically about one real quick. Oklahoma, the model's got the Sooners going 9-3 in their debut SEC season. Got kind of a two-parter here, Jake. How difficult is it to project Texas and Oklahoma, given that they're playing in a new conference, obviously, with a much more difficult slate? And how big of a surprise do you think it would be around the country if Texas comes into this league, goes undefeated, and Oklahoma comes into this league and wins 9 games right off the bat? How surprising do you think that would be to the rest of the country that Texas and Oklahoma would be arguably two of the better teams in the entire SEC right off the bat?
I think nationally that would be a heck of a story. A lot of people, and this is just me, still view the SEC. Now, there's a couple things here. One, we know the SEC does have the most talent in the country. If you don't believe it, just watch the NFL draft coming up here in April, and we'll see it every year. SEC leads the charge. But the SEC around the country still has a stigma that, hey, this is top to bottom a defensive first league. When in reality, the league has kind of fallen off. I mean, if you look at some of these numbers last year, Vanderbilt 101 in defensive scoring efficiency, Arkansas 41, South Carolina 55, Florida 86. I mean, you go down the list here, Ole Miss at 32. I mean, there's a lot of teams that have fallen off defensively. So when you look at Texas, to me, I don't think Texas would be as big a surprise because they played in the college football playoff this year. They had the 17th best offense and the 8th best defense nationally. Steve Sarkisian has really done a great job with his staff teeing this Texas Longhorn team up, I think, to compete week in and week out. Oklahoma, though, last year they were 9th in the country in offensive scoring efficiency and 11th defensive scoring efficiency in the Big 12. But there's a lot that they've had to replace. They've had to find a new quarterback. Dylan Gabriel's off to Oregon. They lost a lot of offensive linemen, but they have recruited well and done a decent job in the transfer portal. And, when you look at Oklahoma, as far as their schedule is concerned, Temple, Houston, and Tulane in the non-conference, their first SEC game, obviously, Tennessee will come calling. Then at Auburn, I think that's a game that they can go get. That will probably be a 4-quarter type ball game. Texas neutral site game after a bye week. South Carolina at Ole Miss, another non-conference game against Maine. They play Missouri, Alabama, and at LSU. So, you look at Vegas right now with Oklahoma, they have their win total at 8. I have them a game over at 9. I wouldn't be surprised if they go 8-4, 7-5, but I have them, winning a couple one possession games that I think they can get. So, again, I look at these numbers and then I say, what does Vegas say? Vegas has them at 8. I have them at 9.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, so you got a couple. Your model's got a couple teams at 9-3: LSU, Oklahoma, Auburn, and Texas A&M. Is that? I don't know if this is a way to really ask this, Jake, but is there one of these that stand out or not really, given that they're all projected to be 9-3? Again, some of that's schedule, some of that's talent, all that. Is there one of these teams, or are they all kind of so close together? What's your thoughts on maybe one of these that is maybe a hair above the rest? LSU, Oklahoma, Auburn, and Texas A&M.
I think if I had to pick, it would be LSU. Because when I look at the overall power ratings in the conference, LSU checks in as the 5th best power rated team. And I'll send you all this. We'll put this out. Power ratings wise, overall, what that means for me is how do they score? How am I scoring these teams? And, for instance, for a benchmark, Georgia scored, 152.57. Texas under them at 135.85. Now, that seems like a big gap, but it's really not that big of a gap. Followed by Alabama, Ole Miss, and then LSU. If LSU, who had the 106th ranked scoring efficiency team last year defensively, can cut that in half, I would say LSU, even with a new quarterback, they have an opportunity to be back to playing quote unquote LSU football. Now, look, we say back to playing LSU football. They just had the Heisman Trophy winner on their team. So if I had to favor one of the teams, I would probably favor LSU of the 9-3.
Now, this was going to get a lot of heat, I would imagine, Jake, and I hope you're ready for it. Just buckle up, buddy, because you got Alabama 8-4, and I'm seeing a lot of this. Again, this is your model, not specifically you, but 8-4 for the Crimson Tide here. And man, I like Kalen DeBoer. I think that was a solid hire. I don't think he makes year 3 if he goes 8-4 2 years in a row. what's your thoughts when you first came out and you saw this Alabama at 8-4?
Well, surprising, and almost it makes you want to, we never do the budget. Like, oh no, surely that's enough. Let's just put 9-3. Let's just put 10-2. That's Alabama, right? But when you look at what's gone on, and again, so much attrition in the transfer portal the last 2 years. I mean, this team, maybe this past year, and I think it was Chris Marler, or somebody put this out, that if you took all of the guys that left Alabama just this year, it would have been the 6th ranked recruiting class in the entire country. You can't have that kind of attrition and it not affect you. And not necessarily affect you. I mean, Alabama coming out there first 22, they're going to be able to compete with most anybody. Just that depth. And, obviously change in a coaching staff. What does that look like? And Jalen Milroe, what will Kalen DeBoer do with Jalen Milroe? We know he's a fantastic player. Can he do what Kalen DeBoer wants him to do, or will they have to kind of pivot and maneuver with that? And you look at Alabama, the reason I have them 8-4, they'll get off the cuff and go 3-0. I think they win at Wisconsin after the bye week. I just, Georgia, Kirby Smart, this feels like one of those games where he says, hey, Kirby takes it personal and says, look, we got this new coach at Alabama and we're fixing to welcome him to the SEC in a Georgia kind of way. And I feel like they'll probably do that. At Vanderbilt, South Carolina, but at Tennessee, I like Tennessee much better in this situation, playing at home. We know that the Volunteers are not scared of the Tide. They beat them 2 years ago. They had their moments last year. I like Tennessee in a close win. Missouri, they should get that win. Again, how good is Missouri going to be? I mean, I think they're obviously going to be one of the better teams in the league. At LSU, again, I favor the Tigers just because of the coaching staff and where that game is played. Mercer, but then at Oklahoma, a loss as well. I think Oklahoma's going to be somewhat of a buzzsaw and then a close win against Auburn. For me, 8-4, 9-3 is kind of where Alabama's going to be. Now, Vegas has Alabama's win total at 9. I go again one win under that at 8. And I just think Alabama, I mean, they're not going to be terrible, but I think they kind of settle back in the pack in year one of a new regime.
Now, another team at 8-4, Jake, this kind of caught me off guard as well. Missouri, given their schedule, because the way I look at it, maybe your model's a little bit different, Jake, but I mean, I'm looking at it, they may be favored in 10 games, maybe 9. The only ones I see them potentially not being favored at A&M, at Alabama, and possibly Oklahoma at home. I think Missouri's going to be favored in every single other game. So what's your thoughts on Missouri coming out at 8-4 according to your model?
Yeah, Vegas has their win total at 9.5. Again, I'm a game and a half under that. I think they'll start out 4-0 against Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, and Vanderbilt. After the bye week, I do think they'll be, depending on what Texas A&M does. And, the Aggies right now, I mean, obviously they'll play Notre Dame right out the gate in a fantastic opening weekend ball game. Then they take on McNeese at Florida, Bowling Green, and Arkansas. So they should have their sea legs, I would say the Aggies would be. So I like Texas A&M at home by just a little bit. Missouri will beat UMass. We know that. But then Auburn and then Bama on the road. I feel like one, if not both of these games are up for grabs. Now, Missouri could definitely beat Auburn. And I don't, maybe at Alabama we'll have to see. But I have them losing 2 very close ball games against both of those teams. After a bye week hosting Oklahoma, I feel like Oklahoma will come in and beat them. So, I mean, I've got 3 games where I call it a close loss, 1-possession ball game. And then they went out at the end at South Carolina, at Mississippi State, and Arkansas. So 1, 2, 3, 4 ball games, I think, that will determine their season if they can stay healthy. And it's kind of in the middle of that schedule, all 1-possession ball games. It looks like for me, which again, I've got them right there at 8-4. I could see them at 9-3. Hey, who knows if the ball bounces the right way, they could go 10-2.
Mm-hmm. And now your model's got 2 teams at 6-6, Jake, and I think this would be 2 wildly different reactions because you got Kentucky 6-6. I think their fans would be just over it, ready for basketball. We all know the jokes there. While Mississippi State, again, I realize the standard is not 6-6 in Starkville, but I think year one, Jeff Lebby, all the uncertainty. If they went 6-6, I think State fans would be pretty fired up heading into 2025. What's your thoughts on these 2 teams that your model's got predicted to go 500?
Yeah, Kentucky, I mean, we know, look, Mark Stoops has gotten more with less with Kentucky, and they've done a great job recruiting. We'll see what, Brock Vandegrift does for them at quarterback. But if you look at Kentucky even last year, you look at the Kentucky Wildcats, I'm trying to find over here, 33rd in total offense and 42nd in defense. It's kind of middle of the pack, which is what we kind of expect for Kentucky. Their schedule sets up where, they play Southern Miss and South Carolina. Should be 2 wins for them. We'll see what happens with South Carolina and how good they're really going to be. I've got them at 4-8 this year, but they could populate out at 5-7 or 6-6. Georgia, Kentucky has just shown they're not likely just not going to beat Georgia. Ohio, so they should be at 3-1 before they take on Ole Miss on the road. That's going to be a tough place to go play. I have them with a close loss. Vanderbilt win after the bye at Florida. Mark Stoops knows how to beat Florida. This goes back into that Florida conversation. This is one of those games where Florida could grab another win, or maybe this sends Kentucky, backwards with a loss. Auburn at home, and of course at Tennessee, Murray State at Texas, and Louisville. So I just think that back half for Kentucky is just too much to ask for when you're talking about Florida, Auburn, Tennessee, sandwich Maine in there, Texas, and Louisville. For Mississippi State and Jeff Levy, it's going to be one of the younger teams in the conference, not totally at the back end, but a lot of youth is going to be expected to step up. They're going to play a different brand of football. They're going to go wide open. They're going to try to play an exciting brand. We'll see what happens with Mississippi State and the way they play. But Eastern Kentucky should be a gift on game one. At Arizona State is a game that I call a close win. Bulldogs, regardless of what has happened, are a more talented team. Arizona State on the road should be a 4-quarter ball game. If Mississippi State can get that, they should beat Toledo and be 3-0 with Florida coming in. I have a close win against Florida, lost to Texas at Georgia, Texas A&M, and then a close win against Arkansas in the middle of the season, just because I think Arkansas is another team that's kind of dead man walking this year. UMass a win, and then lost to Tennessee, Missouri, and Ole Miss to finish the season. So, for Mississippi State, if you look at Kentucky, go back to them, their win total in Vegas is 7. I have them right under 6. For Mississippi State, theirs is at 5, and I have them 1 over at 6. But there is no room for error for Mississippi State to get to 6. And for Kentucky, look, they can get to 7, they can get to 8, but they've got to do the right things.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm a big fan of Shane Beamer, but, man, your model's 4-8. And I think that may be fair, given the fact that Spencer Rattler's off to the NFL, Xavier Legette, one of the breakout stars in the entire SEC. Both those guys off the roster, so they need a lot of help. And when they had those guys, they still couldn't make a bowl game. So how surprised were you that the model has South Carolina regressing yet again, 4-8? And as popular as Shane Beamer is, I don't know how many 4-8s he's going to survive in Columbia.
Yeah, the question is who plays quarterback. When you talk about a couple of journeymen there on that roster and a schedule that does not lend itself to a lot of success. Obviously Old Dominion and at Florida. If they could, at Kentucky, if they could go to Kentucky and get the win and get to 2-0, that would help them mightily. But I think that they lose that ball game. LSU at home, Akron before bye week. I have them 2-2 going into the first bye. And it's similar to Florida. Ole Miss at Alabama, at Oklahoma, take a break. Texas A&M, Vanderbilt, and then Missouri, Wofford, and Clemson. So they're going to be underdogs in several of these games. At Clemson, they'll be an underdog. They'll be an underdog probably against Missouri, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Alabama, Ole Miss, Kentucky, and LSU. So schedule does not lend itself for a lot of success, in my opinion, for South Carolina this year.
Yeah, and then kind of a similar deal, man. Sam Pittman, one of the most beloved figures in the SEC. They're going to your model's got them at 3-9, same as Vanderbilt, but 3-9. Those fans deserve a hell of a lot better than that. And we won 9 games a couple years ago in Fayetteville, and things have clearly just kind of gone backwards on us here. So how many, let's try to give some fans some hope here. How many of these are one-possession games that Arkansas maybe could flip to have a much better record than 3-9 as your model currently projects?
I think there's 3 out there or 4. Look, that Oklahoma State game on week 2, a lot's expected out of Mike Gundy's team this year in the Big 12. If they could go in and grab a game right there in week 2, they'll beat UAPB and UAB on each side of that. That would get them to 3-0. At Auburn, if they're 3-0 going to Auburn, there'll be some hope there, but I think that's a one-possession game. To look at Mississippi State on the road, it's a one-possession game. Typically, Ole Miss and Mississippi State going to Arkansas is very tough for those two teams. I would like to think that Ole Miss-Arkansas game is going to be close. There's another one-possession game out there as well. So, just say 3 or 4. You could see an instance where they win their non-conference. If they can beat Oklahoma State, they win their non-conference out and then grab a couple games and get to 6-6. And I think that would be a win for Sam Pittman. That's something, we'll see if Bobby Petrino can help his former team get to bowl eligibility, and if they can, that would help in recruiting. And then that would, while we don't put a ton of stock in the lower tier bowls anymore for coaches, and selling point to administration and to recruits and say, hey, look, we got this thing going in the right direction. Come help us win at Arkansas. And I think that's what they're going to have to do. Win at Oklahoma State and grab a couple games they shouldn't.
Yeah, then so Vanderbilt, you also 3-9. At least Clark Lee would be able to sell, hey, we're better in Florida, which we're probably going to lose to Florida anyway, but that is something. But, man, if Vanderbilt, Clark Lee, if he's there for 4 years and 3 of them are winless in the conference, I mean, it's just I don't really have anything nice. Can you say one nice thing about Vanderbilt for me, Jake? Because I can't think of anything.
Great engineering school. I know that. It is a great engineering school and a great medical school too.
But which league game is most winnable for the Commodores? Is it that late in the season, South Carolina? That's one a lot of people have circled. But heck, I think South Carolina's beaten them like 16 years in a row. So I don't know why we all assume South Carolina's the one, but is that the one for your model?
I think South Carolina, and then I think if you wanted to grab another one, I think oddly you would have to go to hear me out here, Missouri or Kentucky on the road, just because if they can catch one of those teams kind of sleepwalking, then they may have a shot. Jackie Sherrill used to say this when he was at Mississippi State, and I think he'd die by this and live by this, and I agree with him. Is take any team in the country, you can only get them up for about 3 games in the year, right? Like you can really do the rah-rah speech and get them emotionally. First game of the season, big ball game in the middle, and then a rivalry game at the end of the year. The rest of that time, it's up to these teams to kind of, self-cultivate and self-motivate internally. So, if that's when we typically will see one of these upsets, or 2 or 3 is in the middle of the year where a team kind of gets caught sleepwalking a little bit. So it could happen, in say a Kentucky or Missouri for Vanderbilt. But it just, you hate it for Vanderbilt. You wish they were a little more competitive and had a competitive advantage they could play on in football, but it just hasn't shown itself.
Yeah. Well, Jake, I can't thank you enough. Host of the Afternoon Drive, ESPN Radio out of Mississippi. And, of course, all these projections were from your CFB Hourglass.com. Go check it out. Jake, before you go, can you tell the audience how can they find you? How can they give you a follow and check out all your outstanding work?
Yeah, just follow me on X at Jake Wim. Nothing on the website as far as current right now that's coming. I got a lot of people helping this year, like I told Michael. So we'll have articles that'll start to come out here in the next 3 weeks or so. We're going to start with team-specific articles, and then I'll throw in your national championship type stuff, conference primers. We'll have some podcasts and stuff. So, and you can always find, podcasts are available on Apple iTunes, all the YouTube, Spotify, and all the platforms out there as well. So we'll be cranking this stuff out. It's number season, and it's a lot of math, Michael, and it's fun to kind of see because you look at this and sometimes you shake your head at your own numbers and go, that can't be right. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're not. We'll see.
Well, that's why I like having you on, Jake, because I can barely count. So I'll let you do the math and explain it to the rest of us. All right?
Very good. Very good. Michael, I appreciate you as always.